All right, in this video, we're going to talk about participant observation. Okay, participant observation is also known as direct observation. And here the aim is to give you a closer familiarity or understanding with a given group or individuals. And this could be a religious group, it could be a particular community, it could be a neighborhood, whatever it is. You want to know what their practices are, and you're going to do this through involvement and engagement. Now, again, this is going to be participation actively sometimes passively in their own environment. So this is putting you, the observer, in their context and in their environment over some period of time. Can you think of an instance in your own work where this might have been useful, where direct observation or simply observing would be important or even valuable? Take a moment to think about that. Often this type of data is going to be qualitative. That means that you're going to have notes, you might have photographs of activities, you're going to have, you're going to talk about participants or locations. This is really just you in the natural setting. So think about you taking a notebook or sketch pad or something and then simply observing what people are doing in their everyday lives. Or whether this is in some special circumstances. You, in some cases, might be a fly on the wall, but it might also be that you are participating in some sort of activity. Confidentiality is something that you need to take seriously and keep in mind when you're doing participant observation. Are you going to record and photograph, and whether that is culturally appropriate? That's something that you need to figure out. Making notes of events and meetings and contents, documents and materials and so forth, what's appropriate for you? If you are going to be in a boardroom meeting where they are divulging new plans of a development, are you able to take photographs? Are you able to take notes? Think about what might be appropriate. If you are working in healthcare and you're working in a new hospital, you might not be allowed for you to know who the patients are, or it might not, or how the doctors are treating them. If you're meeting with a group of lawyers, the same thing goes. You might not be able to divulge what case you're working on and who you're working with and so on. So it's important to identify and know that up front what part you're going to keep confidential. If that's going to be the case, make sure that you develop the agreements ahead of time and figure out how you're going to store the data, how you're going to collect it, then store it, and how you might have to share it in the future. Now, participant observation is going to include experiencing, touching, feeling, doing, but also keeping in mind that the important principle of do no harm. As an observer here, you want to make sure that your observation and your participation don't do any harm. Now, naturally, it will have some either implicit or explicit effect on the actual activity or the place that you're going to observe. If you're in a boardroom, people will notice that you are there, just like a reporter in the courtroom. If you are going to an event, say it's a local community event, people are going to know that you're there. So that is important, that you're going to have to remain, you are there as an observer, so keep checking that bias and also keep thinking about your objectivity as you immerse yourself. This participant observation really puts you on the front lines of where that action is, and that's okay. That's really your advantage here. Being able to have that lens into the community is great. Now, this certainly could take time, and you only have a certain amount of resources and time to be able to do that. But it's a good method to be able to at least try that out, put yourself in their shoes, and see what the action is. And it's not just for you, it's for your team, and entrusting your team that they can do this and then bring back information. Again, you can't be all places at all times. But you can also understand how sort of this action is happening in real time. And you're not just watching from sidelines too. In some cases, you are going to be actively engaging in and participating. Now, here's a chart of the way I look at it. You look at some of the different participation observation phases. And in thinking about this, I want you to be systematic in your approach. This is where you're going to collect observable details such as daily log of activities, the interaction with other groups. And think about it here in different 4 phases of participant observation. An established rapport, we've talked about that, about getting to know people, become a friend or at least accepted in that community. And that's really all part of this. And then you're going to get there. What are you doing on location? And this is where you're on the front lines of that action. And third, you're going to record observations. Now that could be through photographs, it could be through sketching, it could be through journaling. But again, here you want to make sure that you are aware of your biases. And then you want to figure out how to analyze the data. It's not just organizing it and compiling it, but what are the data that you are going to collect? What are recurrent themes that you see, and how you're going to analyze them? Let's also look at the type of observation. There are 3 different types here that we're going to look at in this first slide, and then we'll come up with 2 others. So in non-participatory, there's no contact. This is where you're, as you can imagine, you're most distant from the community or from the individuals that you're observing and the activities that you're observing. And this, by its nature, is hard to develop rapport out of this. Or you can't really ask new questions as things come up. You sit very passively. And that leads us to passive participation. So you're a bystander only. So instead of having no contact, you're viewing from afar. Here you're there, sitting in, say, the boardroom and sitting in a community or town hall meeting, but it also allows very little opportunity to establish rapport and immerse yourself. And then you can successively start to get more engaged, moving into moderate participation, where you can start to balance that insider versus outsider role, where you can sometimes participate but not. And then you start to get into more active participation, and then into complete participation, where you can go from becoming a member of embracing folks into active participation. And certainly you're going to have to think about the permits that are going to need to be involved, the permissions and so forth. But in complete participation, that's where you're fully integrated. And often this takes a long time to do, that you're actively living in that community. And so I often stop at active participation because complete participation takes a long time to be able to do that, and I simply just don't have the time and resources to be able to devote to that. Okay, some important strengths to this. One, you can develop a greater understanding of the area and also understand sensitive situations because you've been in them, or you've at least seen them, or you've heard from participants. Next, this is valuable information that you can be used during the scoping phase of the project, but keep in mind that this can take a while. If you want to even do active or moderate or even passive participation, that is going to take a lot of time, and think about how much time you want to devote into the scoping phase. And importantly, it can allow for, as you develop a more place-based and tailored project, yes, during the scoping phase, but also understanding that place will be helpful in the way that you construct your solution sets as well as your recommendation. Weaknesses, it really tells a limited story because you have to spend time in one place and really gain a reliable understanding what's happening. It means that you have to devote some time into that one place. And you can only do that so many times. And you're gonna need other techniques to be able to validate or triangulate the information that you're seeing, and also use other teammates to see that. And it just takes time. It is so very time intensive to be able to do that. Some other important information that you should think about, or excuse me, some other limitations is that the observations you have is going to be one point in time. It may not provide the full description or show the full picture of what's happening. You've certainly got to be aware of your biases and positionality, and we'll talk more about positionality coming up. You've got to be aware of how you might influence what data is being collected, how people might portray themselves in the activities that you're shown. In fact, the more that you are in bed, the greater the possibility is that you are going to shed that objectivity, meaning that the more time you're there, you relate more to them, you might feel more at ease, things might get more casual and informal, and you might lose some of that objectivity as you start to understand more and more of the local circumstances. And I want you to remember that. You check your objectivity as well. And you are going to influence how that data are going to be interpreted and analyzed. And just recognizing that as you collect it, and maybe trying to understand how that might be perceived, how that information, how you might more accurately depict what is happening in that situation.